When a house burst into flames in a quiet neighborhood, everyone thought it was just another tragic accident. No screams, no reported victims, just fire and silence. But then, a retired K9 named Max broke through the police line and ran straight into the inferno. No commands, no hesitation, just instinct. People thought he was confused, traumatized. They were wrong. Because what Max dragged out from the ashes wasn't just a surviving child. It was the first clue to something far more terrifying. This is the story of loyalty beyond logic. A child with no name. And a dog whose nose led him to a secret the world tried to burn away. And it all began with a single bark in the smoke. Welcome to Heroic Animals, where true courage walks on four legs. We bring you powerful stories, real and inspired, about extraordinary animals who risk everything to protect the innocent. Uncover the truth, or simply do what no one else dared to. From loyal K9s to brave strays. These are tales that will move you, challenge you, and remind you that heroes come in all shapes and paws. Subscribe to join our growing community of animal lovers, truth seekers, and believers in the impossible. Every week, a new story. Every time, a reason to believe. The two-story home on Sycamore Lane exploded into fire just after 9 a.m. on what had started as a quiet Saturday. Thick smoke rose like a storm cloud over the sleepy Oregon suburb, blocking out the blue sky, choking the sun. Neighbors stood behind the yellow barricades, hands over their mouths, eyes wide in horror. Sirens wailed in the distance. But it already looked too late. The roof was gone, windows shattered, flames danced out of the second floor like red tongues. Captain Leary from Station 17 shouted orders into his radio. Nobody goes in, that structure's collapsing any second. Firefighters tightened their hoses, dousing the blaze from the perimeter. But nobody could reach the center of the inferno. No screams, no movement, just fire. Until a bark. It pierced through the roar like a gunshot. Low, sharp, and insistent. Someone turned. What the hell? A blur shot past the caution tape, knocking over a cone. A German shepherd, muscular, tactical vest still faded but legible. K9 unit. Max. Grace Rains sprinted after him, heart in her throat. She had just arrived at the scene after seeing the smoke from 3 blocks away, off duty. Wearing sweatpants, a hoodie, and a badge barely visible under her jacket. But none of that mattered now. Max, her partner for 3 years, had broken free of the backseat and was running straight into the blaze. "Stop that dog," someone yelled. Grace didn't. She couldn't. Max wasn't just any K9. He was a veteran, retired after an explosion on a meth raid 2 years ago left him with a damaged hip and scars along his left side. The department said he wasn't fit for service anymore. Grace had refused to let him go to a kennel. She took him home, fed him, walked him, whispered to him on nights when he whimpered in dreams. And now he was charging into fire. A firefighter tried to grab him. Max dodged, fast and low. Another lunge. Max slid under a hose line and disappeared through the shattered front door. Tail vanishing in smoke. "God damn it," Grace gasped, pulling a spare mask from one of the EMT packs and racing after him. Leary stepped in front of her. "You go in there, Rains, and you're coming out in a bag. Then start folding it," she said, and ducked under his arm. Inside, the world was orange. Smoke clogged her throat even with the mask. Heat pressed against her skin like 1,000 needles. Her boots crunched over broken glass. Scorched wood. "Max," she shouted. Nothing. She moved deeper, following his barks, one left, one right, then silence. No, 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 no. She pushed past a half-fallen beam and nearly collapsed from the heat. The house was moments from giving way. Then, a sound. A whimper. Not Max. A child. Her blood froze. She followed it, stumbling toward what was once the hallway to the basement. The entrance was blocked, caved in by debris and soot, but something below was crying. "Max," she choked out. And then, out of the smoke, a shape. Max. His vest singed, fur blackened at the tips, eyes locked on hers, and between his teeth, a blanket, a wet, smoky, half-burnt baby blanket. He dropped it and barked. Once, urgently, then turned and darted back into the thick blackness, not away from the fire, but down. Grace stared in disbelief. There was someone alive down there. And Max had known before anyone else. She ran for the radio. "This is Officer Rains. I need backup at the basement level, possible survivor. And get me medics. Now." Outside, no one could see what was happening. Not yet. But Max did. And he wasn't leaving until he brought that someone out. The medics thought it was a mistake. A glitch in the radio. "Say again, Rains? There's a child. Alive. Max found him. He's in the basement." Grace barked into her mic, already dropping to her knees and clawing at the debris that blocked the narrow stairwell. 2 firefighters rushed to her side, axes in hand, with brute force and urgent swings. They cracked the remains of the banister, exposing just enough space for one of them to wedge through. Max was already below, barking rhythmically. Then the cry returned, weak, muffled, but unmistakable. "That's a baby," one firefighter muttered. "No, not a baby," Grace said, staring into the smoke with wide, trembling eyes. "A toddler." 2 minutes later, Max emerged from the basement first, jaws clamped gently on the collar of a soaked, soot-covered hoodie. Behind him, a firefighter carried the limp form of a small boy, maybe 3 years old, arms dangling like a rag doll. "Get me oxygen, now," someone screamed. The medics swarmed. Grace pushed forward but stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the child's face. It wasn't the burns, though his skin was reddened and his eyebrows singed. It wasn't the scrapes on his arms or the dried blood near one ear. It was his expression. Blank. No panic, no tears, just a hollow, faraway gaze. "Vitals?" someone asked. "Pulse. Faint but steady. Breathing shallow. Pupils reactive." Max stood guard next to the stretcher as they worked. He didn't bark, didn't move, just watched, muscles taut, his sides heaved from exertion, tongue lolling out of the side of his mouth, but his eyes stayed on the boy. Grace dropped to one knee beside him. "You found him," she whispered. Max didn't look at her. He was still focused on the child. The medics lifted the boy into the ambulance. Max tried to jump in after them. "Wait, hold on, you can't." But Grace raised a hand. "Let him ride." The paramedics hesitated, then nodded. Max hopped into the ambulance and curled up at the boy's feet. Later that afternoon at St. Mary's Hospital, the boy was stabilized and moved to pediatric ICU. Doctors treated minor burns, dehydration, and smoke inhalation, but the questions were just beginning. "No ID," the attending nurse told Grace and Detective Marcus Yoon. "No name, no record of residence. No one's come forward." "The house?" Marcus asked. "Rental. Under an LLC. Rented short term. Listed tenant, Michael Bledsoe." But, he flipped through a file. Bledsoe died in 2019. So it's either identity theft or a ghost lease. Grace frowned. "What about the kid?" The nurse looked uneasy. "Well, we found signs of restraint." Grace's stomach twisted. "Tied down?" "Wrists and ankles show light bruising, consistent with soft bindings, like fabric. And," he paused, "multiple healed injection marks. Not vaccines. No record in the state health database." "Are you saying someone was drugging him?" "We're saying," he sighed, "this boy didn't just survive a fire. He survived something else, too." Grace stared through the glass window into the ICU room. The boy lay still, an oxygen tube under his nose, IV in his arm. Beside him, Max sat like a stone statue, not blinking. The nurses had tried to move him. He growled, not with aggression, but with protection. One nurse had said softly, "Let him stay." The boy's heartbeat calms when the dog's near. Grace's phone buzzed, a call from HQ. She ignored it, because right now, everything else could wait. There was a kid who didn't exist. A house rented by a dead man. A dog who ran straight into hell and came out with a soul in his teeth. And Grace knew, deep in her bones, this was no accident. Max hadn't just smelled fire. He'd smelled something hidden, something deliberately buried. And this boy was only the beginning. The hospital room was quiet except for the gentle beep of monitors and the rhythmic whir of oxygen flow. The little boy hadn't made a sound since arriving. No crying, no speaking, just empty eyes that tracked nothing. Grace stood just outside the glass, arms crossed, jaw tight. Max was curled beside the boy's bed, head resting on the mattress, one ear twitching every now and then. "He's dissociating," said Dr. Patel, the pediatric trauma specialist. "We see this in extreme cases of neglect or captivity. Captivity? Grace turned. The doctor nodded. He doesn't flinch, doesn't respond to human voices. But he reacted when we touched his arm. How? He froze, like a soldier trained not to move. Grace swallowed hard. That's not learned by accident. Dr. Patel sighed. No bruises that suggest recent beatings. But the scars are psychological. And the needle marks? At least a dozen. Left arm, right thigh, spaced irregularly. Someone was doing something to him. Grace murmured. Something that wasn't medical. Back at the scene of the fire, investigators combed through the wreckage. The house was barely standing. Charred beams jutting like broken ribs. Fire marshal reports labeled the cause, likely intentional. Accelerant traces on the basement stairs confirmed it, arson. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Detective Marcus Yoon called Grace over comms. You need to come see this. 20 minutes later, she stood in what was left of the basement, now partially cleared. The staircase was ash, but beneath the floorboards, investigators had found something hidden beneath a plywood hatch. Singed but intact. A small locked room, no larger than a closet. Insulated walls, a cot, a single bulb, and chains bolted into the concrete. Oh my God, Grace whispered. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't a panic room. It was a cell. The hinges on the inside of the hatch were sealed shut. Likely bolted from above. Whoever put the boy down here hadn't planned to let him out. Why burn the house? Grace muttered. Yoon crouched beside the scorched hatch. Maybe to destroy evidence. Or maybe they just thought he wasn't gonna get out. Grace glanced at Max, who was sniffing around the edge of the room. His fur was still singed. But he moved with purpose. Yoon raised an eyebrow. He's not done, is he? Grace didn't answer. Because something inside her already knew. Neither of them were. That night at the hospital, Grace returned to the boy's room. Max hadn't moved, still at his post, still watching. Grace stepped inside quietly, sat on the chair beside the bed. The boy stirred. For the first time, he turned his head toward her. Slowly, mechanically, his lips parted. No sound came out, just a faint, broken whisper of breath. Then, he reached out, not to Grace, to Max. Tiny fingers curled into the dog's fur. Max didn't flinch, didn't move, but his tail thumped, just once, against the bed. Grace leaned forward. Hey, sweetheart, it's okay, you're safe now. The boy blinked, and said nothing, but deep in his eyes, something flickered, not light, not recognition, but memory. Something still trapped inside, something waiting to be unlocked. Puzzle piece somewhere in a locked cabinet downtown. Marcus Yoon stared at the rental records from the LLC that had owned the house. None of the paperwork matched. The names were fake, the signatures sloppy, but one receipt stood out, dated 2 days before the fire. A delivery, large shipment, medical equipment, no hospital listed. Yoon's eyes narrowed. Why would someone install restraints and order biometric monitors for a child? Grace sat alone on the bench outside St. Mary's. A styrofoam cup of bitter hospital coffee cooling in her hands. The night air was sharp. And even with her jacket zipped up to her chin, she still felt cold. Not from the wind, from the memory. 2 years ago, Max had saved her life. It had been a meth lab raid, standard call. Intel confirmed. She and Max were part of Entry Team Bravo. The suspects had fled, and she and her unit moved into what they thought was a cleared structure. Only it wasn't. She never heard the click. Just the sound of Max barking, one deep, guttural snap of air, and then the weight of 90 pounds of muscle slamming into her chest, driving her to the ground. The explosion tore through the front of the building a half-second later. When she came to, ears ringing, lungs burning, she was pinned under a collapsed beam. Max was beside her, bleeding, whimpering, a gash down his flank that exposed more than fur. But he wouldn't leave, wouldn't move, wouldn't let anyone near her until the team arrived. She owed him everything. After surgery, after rehab, after months of bureaucracy and whispers about whether Max could still perform. The department retired him. Too slow, they said, limped too much. Grace took him home that same day. No kennel, no handler switch. He was family. But now, watching him curl protectively beside a silent, broken boy in a hospital bed, she realized something. Max hadn't just saved her body that day. He had sensed the danger before it happened. And now, he had done it again. Back at the station, Detective Yoon stood over a whiteboard, a marker in one hand and frustration in the other. LLC's fake. No real owner. No bank trace. The delivery of medical gear? Paid in cash. And the rental agent? Disappeared. He turned to Grace. None of this fits. You don't build a prison under a house for one kid unless you've done it before. Or plan to do it again. Grace nodded slowly. And you don't torch it unless someone's getting too close. She pulled a folder from her bag and dropped it on the desk. Inside were photos, scorched restraints, a torn child's shirt, a label from a biometric monitor still half melted. I sent the serial number to a friend at the FDA. She said, turns out, that device was part of a limited run trial, military medical contractors only. Never sold to civilians. Yoon's eyebrows rose. You think this is bigger than trafficking? I think we're looking at something layered, controlled, and someone's cleaning house. Back at the hospital, the boy had finally fallen into a light, restless sleep. Nurses moved quietly, checking vitals, adjusting IVs. Max never stirred, but his eyes tracked every hand, every movement. Grace returned just after midnight and sank into the chair beside the bed. She watched Max breathe, slow, steady, one eye half open, always watching. Then something caught her attention. A small tag sewn into the boy's shirt collar, singed but readable under the right light. She leaned closer, squinting. Unit 3 Property 072A. Her breath caught. Not a name, not a school tag, not even a hospital ID. A designation. As if he wasn't a person at all. Just inventory. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. Then she looked at Max. You knew, she whispered. You didn't smell smoke. You smelled fear, despair. Max blinked. Tail twitched once. Like agreement. Grace leaned back in her chair. The puzzle pieces were there. A fake lease. A locked cell. A boy labeled like equipment. And a dog who had once saved her from an invisible danger. Doing it again. The sun hadn't risen yet when Grace pulled back into the fire-gutted ruins of the house on Sycamore Lane. The ash was cold now. The smell still clung to the air, acrid, chemical, purposeful. She ducked under a scorched beam. Flashlight slicing through what remained of the basement. Most of the damage had been surveyed. Most of the evidence bagged. But Grace knew better than to trust most. She returned to the small cell, the hidden room under the floorboards. Max had paced around this spot before. She crouched low, scanning the edges, brushing away soot with her gloved hands. Then her fingers hit something solid. Not concrete. Metal. A small fireproof box. The kind used to protect documents in high-value homes. Its latch had melted shut. But the hinges were still intact. She dragged it up and out with effort, coughing from the rising dust. Once outside, she used a crowbar from the trunk of her cruiser. It took 3 minutes and all her strength. The lid cracked open. Inside, files, burnt at the edges, but legible. Dozens of them, each one labeled with handwritten codes. Unit 3, Subject 072A. Unit 3, Subject 073B. Unit 4, Subject 109C, and on. Inside each folder, there were photos of children. None older than 5. Most were asleep, unconscious, or strapped to gurneys. Several had monitors attached. Some had tubes in their arms. A few had barcodes on their wrists. And each folder included medical logs. Not just health reports, experimental data. Metabolic resilience, trauma response, drug tolerance. All tracked, measured, compared. Like lab rats. One of the last folders was labeled simply, Transfer Failed, Unit 072A. Grace's blood ran cold. She opened it. It was him, the boy Max had pulled from the flames. In the photo, he was unconscious, lying on the same cot found in the basement cell. Tubes in his nose, a monitor strapped to his chest. A note was stapled to the top. Subject shows higher than expected cortisol resistance. Monitor for extended response to environmental trauma. Phase 2 transfer scheduled. Asset marked for deep hold placement. Initials. DG. Grace stared at the note. Deep hold placement. She knew what that meant. Burial. Disposal. Erasure. Back at the hospital, Detective Yoon arrived with a pale expression and fresh intel. I checked with the Department of Health. He said, that unit designation? It doesn't match any childcare facility. But get this, 2 years ago, There was a short-lived research project filed under a federal subcontract in this region. It was shut down, supposedly for ethics violations. Name? Grace asked. Haven Biotech. The name meant nothing, until Yoon pulled up a scanned report from a redacted investigation file. At the bottom was a familiar set of initials. DG. Grace read it aloud. Diane Greaves? Yoon nodded. She used to run a halfway house for abandoned minors. Lost her license. Multiple complaints of neglect. Nothing ever stuck. Grace remembered the name now. Diane Greaves had vanished from public records nearly a year ago. But someone, somewhere, was still using her identity. Still moving kids. Still treating them like subjects. And now, one of them had survived. Thanks to Max. Later that night, Grace returned to the ICU. The boy was awake, but quiet, still didn't speak. But when Grace entered, he turned his head. And when Max stepped in behind her, the boy sat up, just an inch, just enough to rest his hand on the dog's neck. Grace kneeled beside him and whispered, "Do you remember anything? Anything at all?" No response. She reached into her bag and pulled out a laminated copy of the photo from his file, cropped to hide the tubes. The wires, just his face. She showed it to him. "Is this you?" He looked at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. In the hallway, Grace clutched the folder tighter. "Someone wanted you gone," she murmured. "Someone called you an asset. But you're not a number." She looked down at Max, who was watching her silently. "You're a survivor. And thanks to this dog, they didn't erase you." The address listed on several of the burned files was vague. A rural route. No suite number. No signage. Just a GPS coordinate tagged, Unit 3 last registered intake. Most investigators might have dismissed it as a dead end. But not Grace. And not Max. They arrived just after dawn. The place looked like any other rundown institutional property. Chain link fencing wrapped in rust. A sagging porch. A crooked sign so weather-worn it was barely legible. Faded letters spelled out, Meadowridge Youth Residential Academy. Except there were no children. No staff. No power. Just silence. Max stepped out of the SUV before Grace even opened the door. His ears perked, nose twitching. He was already working. Grace stepped beside him, hand resting on her holster. "Easy, buddy. Let's see what they were hiding." The front door creaked open with one push. The inside smelled of dust, mildew, and time, abandoned furniture, overturned chairs, papers scattered across the floor like forgotten whispers. Old motivational posters still hung on the walls. "You are not alone. Healing starts here." The irony stung. Max moved slowly, nose low to the ground. They passed old dormitories, classrooms with chalk still half written on the boards, a nurse's station with broken cabinets. But then, he stopped, mid-hallway, head tilted, nose pointed toward a wall that looked like any other. But Max began to growl. Low, focused, not loud, not panicked, instinctive. Grace crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" She knocked on the wall. Hollow. Behind a faded poster, they found a seam. Grace ripped it down, revealing a narrow panel. No handle. Just a tiny groove where fingers could slide in and pry. She pulled. The wall gave way with a quiet hiss, revealing a hidden stairwell, descending into darkness. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly. Cold concrete lined the walls. The air was stale, still, heavy. They flicked on their flashlights. At the bottom was a locked steel door. Grace didn't wait, she kicked it with the heel of her boot. Once, twice. On the third, the rusted latch gave way. What lay inside wasn't just hidden. It was engineered to be forgotten. Rows of metal cribs, empty but still bolted to the floor. Shelves lined with plastic containers labeled with initials and numbers. A fridge, dead but still stocked with expired vials. A corner table held restraints, plastic gloves, and clipboards. This wasn't a classroom. It was a lab. Grace moved through slowly, taking photos, voice low as she recorded everything. Max stayed near her heel, sniffing each surface, tail rigid. Then he stopped again, in front of a vent near the floor. He began to bark. Grace dropped beside him, unscrewed the panel, and inside, tucked deep behind loose insulation, she pulled out a notebook. Leather-bound, locked with a wrap of twine. When she opened it, her stomach turned. Pages upon pages of entries, daily logs. Test results, feeding schedules, chemical doses, but not for one child. For many, each labeled with designations matching the ones in the burned file box. 072A, 073B, 074C. Some were marked, transferred. Others, disposed, and scribbled at the bottom of one page in hurried ink. DG scheduled Phase 2 review. East site not secure. Surveillance compromised. Units must be moved by end of quarter. DG again. Diane Greaves. She hadn't disappeared. She had expanded. Grace stood frozen in the center of the hidden lab, notebook in hand, surrounded by ghosts she couldn't see, but could almost hear. Whispers in the walls. Tiny footsteps echoing behind her mind. They were raised like animals. She murmured, "No, like commodities." Max whined lowly. He was facing the far wall now. Tail down, body tense. Grace followed his gaze. There was another door. No lock this time, just a rusted handle and the faint smell of bleach seeping from beneath it. She pushed it open. Inside was a single chair, bolted to the ground, straps still dangling. And above it, nailed to the wall, a photograph. The boy, the one Max had saved. In the photo, he was maybe 6 months younger. Still in that same expressionless state. Still blank. But someone had scribbled something beneath the image in red ink. "She is not yours." Grace stepped back. What the hell does that mean? Behind her, Max growled. He was facing the hallway again. Someone had just opened the door upstairs. The creak of the upstairs door echoed down the hidden stairwell like a gunshot. Grace froze, back pressed to the cold wall of the underground lab. Max stood rigid beside her, fur bristling, tail stiff. Someone was up there. Not an investigator, not a neighbor. They hadn't used the front door. She flicked off her flashlight, drawing her sidearm with practiced control. Max shifted silently, already halfway to the stairs. Each step like a loaded spring. Footsteps, soft, but confident. Whoever it was, they knew this place. Grace crouched low and whispered, "Stay close." As they reached the top of the stairs, she could make out a silhouette in the hallway, tall, lean, gloved, a black duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Grace raised her weapon. "Police, show me your hands." The figure turned, didn't run, didn't even flinch, just slowly raised both hands. Empty palms forward. "I'm just the cleaner," he said, voice calm. "What does that mean?" He smiled. "Means you got too close." Max growled, inching forward. The man eyed the dog, then dropped the duffel. It hit the floor with a metallic clunk. Grace narrowed her eyes. "What's in the bag?" He didn't answer, just shrugged. "I was told the site was already cleared. Guess someone didn't finish the job." "Who told you?" Another shrug. "Names don't matter. Only delivery and cleanup." Grace stepped forward. "You're under arrest. On your knees." That's when the man made his move. Not toward her, but toward Max. He lunged, pulling something from inside his jacket, a small baton or blade. Grace couldn't tell. Max was faster. He launched like a missile, jaws clamping down on the man's forearm with a sickening crunch. The baton fell, clattering uselessly across the tile. The man screamed, stumbled, tried to shove the dog off, but Max held. Grace rushed forward, kicking the suspect's knee out and forcing him to the ground. She cuffed him with practiced precision, blood from his arm already dripping onto the floor. "You picked the wrong house," she muttered. Back at the station, under interrogation, the man said very little. No ID, no criminal record on file. He refused a lawyer, refused food, until Max entered the room. The man flinched, his mouth twisting. "That dog," he spat. "That dog's why this all went sideways." Grace folded her arms. "What was in the duffel?" The man hesitated. Then, restraints, tools, syringes. "For what?" He looked her dead in the eye. "To take the boy back." Meanwhile, back at St. Mary's Hospital, the boy, now nicknamed Ash by the nurses, woke from a nap with a sharp gasp. He looked around, eyes wide, lips trembled. A nurse leaned in. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe." Ash shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "He's coming." The nurse's smile faded. "Who, honey?" Ash looked at the door. "The man with the black bag." Grace returned to the hospital that night. She sat beside Ash, watching him sleep. Max curled protectively by the door. She couldn't shake the image of the photo on that lab wall. The red writing. She is not yours. Why she? Was Ash mistaken for someone else? Or had someone else been taken before him? She pulled out the notebook from the lab again. Flipped to a page near the back. There, scrawled between intake logs and dosage notes, was another line in red pen. Asset 073B compromised. Replace with next viable match. And beneath it, circled twice, 073B. Ash. He wasn't just kidnapped. He wasn't even the original target. He was a replacement, which meant someone else was missing, and whoever wanted him back wasn't done yet. The notebook sat open under a harsh fluorescent desk lamp in Grace's precinct office. Pages marked with red ink, strange initials, codes, and what looked like shipping logs, not packages, but people, children. Max sat near her feet, unusually still, as if he, too, sensed the weight of what they were about to uncover. Grace and Detective Yoon worked through the night, cataloging the information line by line. We've got dates, Yoon said, pointing at a timeline scrawled across the whiteboard, corresponding to disappearances in 3 counties. No missing person reports, no parent filings, just vanishings. Grace circled several log entries. These aren't just kids from the system. Look, notations like FNAV, G null, T gray. These aren't names, they're categories. Based on what? Grace flipped to one particularly disturbing page. 2 columns labeled compliant and non-compliant. Some were marked with check marks. Others were crossed out with one word beside them, erased. Yoon exhaled. This isn't trafficking, it's curation, selection, like livestock. They paused. Then Grace pulled up the coordinates from one log labeled transfer point 601B. The location, a small, private marina near the industrial bay, long decommissioned. Currently leased to a shipping company under yet another shell name. By early morning, Grace and Max arrived at the docks. The air was thick with salt and diesel. Most of the warehouses were abandoned, windows boarded, doors padlocked. But one building had fresh tire tracks outside and faint signs of life. A half-burnt cigarette. Recent footprints. A flickering motion sensor light. Max stiffened, his ears perked, nose flaring. You smell it? Grace whispered. Max didn't bark, he just walked. Inside the warehouse, the darkness felt engineered. Light barely reached the corners. The air was cold, artificially so. A few crates sat stacked near the far wall. But Grace's attention went to the small door in the back, slightly ajar. A keypad beside it blinking red. Locked, she muttered. Max didn't wait. He growled, deep and low, and began pawing at the metal. Grace stepped closer. Through the crack, she could see cribs. 6 of them. Empty, clean, ready. And beside them, folded uniforms. Branded with a logo she hadn't seen before, Haven Group International. Not a hospital. Not a school. A front. She snapped photos rapidly, documenting every angle. But then, footsteps. Behind her. Max turned instantly, barking with ferocity. Grace spun, gun raised. A figure in a gray hoodie froze at the entrance. Teenager, maybe 16, thin, pale, eyes wide with fear. Don't shoot, he cried. Please, I didn't know someone else was here. Grace lowered her weapon. Who are you? The boy looked past her. Saw the cribs, the uniforms. He swallowed hard. I was one of them. He whispered. 2 years ago. Grace stepped forward slowly. What's your name? He hesitated. Elijah, but they called me G Null. I ran during the transfer. They've been looking for me ever since. She nodded. We need to get you out of here. But Elijah grabbed her wrist. You don't get it. They're not just using this place. They own it. The police. The papers. Everything. They erased my whole record. I don't exist anymore. A pause. Neither does he. Elijah added, pointing to Max. Grace froze. What do you mean? I've seen that dog before. Her stomach turned. Elijah. Are you saying Max was part of this? Elijah shook his head. No, but the people who tried to take the boy you saved? They've used dogs like him. Programmed, trained to track, to silence. But he broke away. That's why they want him gone. Grace looked down at Max. He stared up at her. Calm, unafraid. And in that moment, she realized. They hadn't just tried to bury the truth. They had tried to weaponize it. Back at the hospital, Ash stirred in his sleep. His fingers gripped the sheets tightly. His breath quickened. The nurse leaned in. Ash's eyes opened wide. "He's coming again," he whispered. "He found me." The wind screamed against the windows of St. Mary's pediatric wing. Outside, a storm brewed over the bay, dark clouds rolling in like a warning. Inside room 217, Ash clutched his plush sheep with both hands. Wide eyes locked on the door. "They're coming," he whispered. "Tonight." Grace didn't question him. Not anymore. She stood by the window. Sidearm holstered, vest zipped. Max lay at the foot of the bed, ears twitching at every sound. Outside the room, 2 uniformed officers were stationed on rotation. But Grace knew this wasn't enough. Not for what was coming. They wanted Ash back. Not because he was just a missing child, but because he was evidence. And the last living witness to something designed to disappear forever. At 11:41 p.m., the power cut out. Emergency lights blinked on with a soft hum. Grace's phone went dead. No signal. No comms. Exactly like at Meadowridge. "Stay with him," Grace told one officer. "You sweep the south exit." Then she heard it. The door lock clicking. She spun. Too late. A man in surgical scrubs shoved his way into the room. Face covered. Needle already primed. Max launched. The syringe missed by inches, crashing into the tile as the man crashed into the floor. Max's teeth embedded in his arm. Ash screamed. Grace fired once, non-lethal round, striking the intruder in the leg. He went down, hard. Backup stormed the hallway. The man was cuffed, bleeding, growling through his mask. Grace yanked it off. Not a doctor. A contractor. The same kind used in overseas renditions. Clean cut. No ID. No fingerprints on record. And yet, on his belt, a tag. Haven 601B. They had come for Ash. And they would have taken him again, if not for Max. Days later, federal agents arrived. Arrests were made. Storage units raided. Bank accounts frozen. Project Haven was exposed, not as a nonprofit, but a covert network laundering children under the guise of therapeutic custody. Data collection, medical testing, genetic sorting. Over 40 children were rescued. Grace testified. So did Elijah. So did Ash, eventually. In whispered words, holding Max's fur in one hand the entire time. But not everyone was caught. Diane Greaves was never found. And some names in the notebook remained tied to sealed government files. Still, something had changed. For the first time, the story had a witness. And a dog who refused to let it stay buried. 6 weeks later, Ash was placed in protective foster care with Elijah's family. Monitored by federal marshals, Grace visited every week. Max always went too. Whenever Max entered the room, Ash smiled in a way no trauma could erase. Safe, unafraid, home. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Grace walked Max through the field behind her cabin. He no longer limped, not as much, but his steps were slower now. Measured, peaceful. She crouched beside him and scratched the soft patch behind his ear. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "Even when no one listened. You always knew." Max blinked slowly, then leaned his head into her shoulder. No bark, no sound, just that deep, familiar calm. A year later, a bronze statue was unveiled outside the Portland K-9 Training Academy. The plaque read, "In honor of Max, the dog who saw what no one else did. Who heard what no one would listen to. And who never, ever let go." Next to the statue stood a boy. Now taller, stronger, holding a leash. And at the other end of it, an older, slower Max. Still watching, still guarding, still home. Max didn't need orders. He didn't need permission. He just knew something was wrong, and he refused to walk away. Because sometimes, the bravest souls don't wear badges. They walk on 4 legs, and never let go. If you believe heroes come in all shapes, and pause, don't forget to subscribe for more true and inspired stories. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Max and Ash's story. We know it was emotional, intense, and at times hard to believe, but sometimes, real heroes don't wear capes, they wear fur. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more powerful, true and inspired tales of heroic animals. And we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Do you believe dogs like Max can sense what we can't? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and never underestimate the heart of a K9.